Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Curt custom fit vehicle wiring for flat-toed vehicles on a 2023 Jeep Wrangler. Now this kit is custom fit to our Wrangler as well as a few other generations of Wrangler as well as the Gladiator. And when it comes to flat towing vehicles, one of the things that's really come with technology is diode wiring. And long gone are the days of magnetic tow lights, mostly because vehicles today just aren't magnetic. And that's one more cable that you have to run down the vehicle, and it's just one more thing to store. So having diode wiring is really nice because you can simply plug in your umbilical and it'll send the running lights, turn signals, and brake lights to the towed vehicle lights. That way it keeps you safe and legal. Now, with that being said, traditionally the diodes that we install do require cutting into the factory harness or factory taillight wires, and that's where people start to get a little bit scared. Once you start messing around with factory wiring, I get it. It can be a little bit worrisome, but they're generally pretty reliable. We don't really have too many issues with those, but if you want to take the guesswork out of making sure you have the proper wiring, or if you're not a wiring expert, this is definitely the kit for you. This is a great way to save some time and make a nice clean install by having it plug and play. So really when it comes down to the installation, it's just taking the taillights out, plugging it in, and then they give you ample enough amount of wire to run that up to the front, and it'll have a 4-pole end. Now we tied ours into a 6-pole end, so that's not a problem. It also comes with a jumper harness with a 4-to-4. That way if you are maintaining that 4-pole end, you can do that as well. But another cool feature about this wiring harness is the fact that it does give you the ability to later tie into a 4-pole end here. It gives you a plug that's ready to go. So if you plan on putting accessories that may have lights or towing a trailer regularly with your Jeep, you can just simply get a plug-in harness, and then not only are you ready for flat towing your Jeep, but you're also ready to have trailer wiring ready to go. The instructions do a great job of laying out exactly kind of where to run everything, but I'm also going to walk you through so you get yours installed. And I mentioned previous that we tied ours into a 6-pole connector, so if that's what you're doing, that's how I'm going to show you to do it. But keep in mind, if you have a fixed braking system that you're installing, like the Stay and Play Duo, you're going to want to grab that extra length of 4-pole, which it is there already, and pull that up into the engine bay before making your way down to the 6-pole. But other than that, super easy, so follow along and we'll get yours installed. Let's break down the harness and see what we have here. So obviously this big spool of 4-pole wiring, this is going to run up to the front of the vehicle. So if you haven't already, you might want to mount up your bracket. It does come with a 4-pole bracket, which is cool. But again, we're going to be using a 6-pole. And they also come with a jumper harness. So if you plan on leaving the 4-pole end, in the instructions they have it in the engine bay, and then you just take that jumper harness to jump it between vehicles, that's also an option. But for our sake today, this is going to be running up to the front of the vehicle underneath, and we'll be zip tying that up as we go. There's also a ground wire that we're going to be attaching somewhere underneath the vehicle. And that brings us to our first small harness here. And this is going to be a factory style plug. So once we get these taken off, you'll see these are going to be exactly the same as what's on the Jeep from the factory. And the yellow and brown, that's going to be our left turn signal as well as the running lights. So that's going to plug in here. Now we'll be running this across over to our passenger side, and that's what this long harness is with the similar style plugs with the green and brown. Those will go over to our passenger side. To get our harnesses in place, we're first going to take our taillights out, and if you haven't done that on your Jeep, it's actually very easy. You're just going to go back here on the plastic, and you'll see this cover. There's a small notch here that with a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool like I have here, you can kind of just pry on that and get this to be removed. Now, they say to use a Torx bit on this plastic nut, and it's spring-loaded, and this will loosen up and allow you to pull the taillights off, but I found if you use a 10-millimeter socket, that's also going to accomplish it. So, we'll go ahead and get that taken off. And that plastic, that whole clip should kind of stay in place. It's loose, but it's going to allow this taillight to drop out because it just bolts into here. So at this point, we're just going to take our taillight out, and you'll have a red locking tab that locks it in place. Once you pull that back, just push on the tab, and then you may have to kind of play with this. Sometimes these are a little bit tricky, but pushing down will get that to separate. We're then just going to repeat the same process on the other side. Now with both the taillights removed, we'll go ahead and grab the brown and yellow harnesses, and you'll see there's a nice opening here. You can see the shock mount, and we're just going to route our plug up through there. And there's some plastic around here, so just make sure you have that on kind of the inside towards the rear bumper. And with this pulled up, what we're going to do is go ahead and make our first connection. So you'll see, again, it's pretty hard to mess up here. This is going to go into this section here. We'll lock that in place. We'll then grab our taillight and get this plugged in. And lock that tab as well. And we can go ahead and get this taillight put back in place. We're just going to tighten down that plastic nut. And before we get any of the other parts of the harness ran, we have our ground wire here. And we're going to need to get this attached to somewhere on the frame of the vehicle. I don't see any factory ground studs for us to mount this up. So we're going to be using a self-tapping screw. And I'm going to go in this area here. I'm just going to kind of clean this up on the area that I'll be drilling. And with the 3/32 drill bit, we'll just go ahead and make a pilot hole here. And to get this put in place, I'm just using a 1/4 inch bit. You don't need to get too crazy as far as tightening it. You just need to make it snug to where that ring terminal is not going to spin around. And that should be good. Any more than that, you run the risk of stripping out the hole that you just made. So at this point, we'll leave this. We'll come back and zip tie this up as necessary, but we're going to continue on with our wire harness here that's all wire loomed up. And this is going to route over to our passenger side tail pocket. So here by our ground, we're going to just kind of go up. There's a body mount here, and you'll see the zip ties. I just ran it on the top side here. And then I also took that 4-pole trailer wiring harness and zip tie that up. That way, if for whatever reason later on, if they wanted to add that 4-pole, it's right there ready to go. And then just kind of continued this on. I routed this one up and kind of through this gap here. It's pretty tight, but they are able to fit through there, and it keeps these nice and protected. So at this point, we're going to route these up into our taillight pocket and get them hooked up. Now on the passenger side, it might be just slightly a little bit more difficult than the driver's side, and that's just because the nature of this taillight pocket is slightly different. You'll see that this arm, as you open and close your rear gate, that is a potential to make contact with any wiring that's here, obviously. So what I'm going to do, you'll see that circle. I have a pull wire. Ours is just an airline tube, but if you have a spare wire, really, honestly, anything that you can kind of feed through here, you'll just pass this down. And then you can tape that harness up and then pull it up, and that's going to make it a lot easier. So I went ahead and passed this up. So just running down that airline tube, it gives you a nice clean path. It's fairly tight to get this through here, but it will fit. So with this being said, just like the other side, snap this in place, put this one on the taillight, and do the same thing. And then when putting this back, it shouldn't make contact with this. It should kind of live down here. Shouldn't be an issue. But if you really wanted to, you could zip tie this up. Just kind of keep it out of the way. So at this point, we have both of our sides connected. And I mentioned we can zip tie up our ground wire. It's also a good time to grab our 4-pole end, and we're going to start routing this towards the front. Now, the instructions really lay it out pretty detailed as far as how to go safely. But really, if you just kind of follow no moving parts, no heat, or anything that can chafe the wires, and normally if you follow some factory wire loom, it's a pretty safe bet to get this up to the front. Now, also you're going to want to determine if you're going to run this into the engine bay or if you are going to mount it up front like we are today. But I'll go ahead, I'll get this all routed and zip tied up and then show you how I did it. To get this routed up, it's actually fairly easy on this vehicle. So we'll go up over kind of our shock mount. And I just followed the frame, just zip tying it up. I left the zip ties here so you can see them. There's wire up there that you can zip tie it up. Just go over the shock mount and over this cross member here and make your way to the frame rail. And at this point, I use holes in the frame to zip tie this up. I try my best to not ever zip tie on hard lines, as that can cause chafing. So just kind of following along here. I zip tied it again. Once I got to this, you got this heat shield here, or heat wrapped wires. So we just went along here, zip tied it here, and then continued up. Now at this point, you can decide whether or not to go up into the engine bay. But either way, a safe path if you're going to the front is to go on the outside here of the body mount and then make your way over. There's the kind of radiator support here that I went over, and this allows us to kind of eliminate any of the steering. We have our sway bar here, but I kind of just went over to this opening, zip tie that up, and then pulled it through where I'm going to be mounting up our 6-pole. So here I have my bracket mounted up for the 6-pole, and as I mentioned previous, if you are keeping your 4-pole end, you're pretty well good to go. It does come with a mount that allows you to put this in place, and then you just use the jumper to go to your RV. If you have any extra slack, what I would do is just kind of spool it up a little bit, zip tie it, and even if you're going to a 6-pole, it is a good thing to have extra wire. That way, if for whatever reason, if you need to change out your plug, you're not just using what little slack you have. You'll be able to pull some out and get a fresh cut. So that's what we're going to do. And something else that you might want to consider is if you're doing a charge line, this is also the time that you would tie that into your 6-pole, so you might want to get that ready to go. So what we'll do is we're going to cut off our wires here. And we'll get these separated. And the kit doesn't come with a 6-pole. There's a bunch of different brands that we have here at eTrailer. You can pick which one works best for your application. They're all pretty much the same. Some of them will come with a rubber boot that's going to kind of seal everything up. So if that's the case, take that rubber boot and slide it back behind this, this mounting plate here. But today we have a Pollock that doesn't have one. So no problem. We'll just get our center portion taken out. And they're all really going to be about the same. They're going to have little letters that are embossed in the different spots that the wires go, and they're going to correspond with the wires that we have run here. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to get these set up and then show you exactly where they go. It's just going to be a small little screw to back out. Don't take it out all the way. These are real small and really tricky to find if you drop them. So just back it out enough to where that wire, when stripped, can go in there, and then you can tighten it back down, but just kind of leave it like that. Now the letters on mine are slightly different than what you may have on your 6-pole. So what we're going to be working with is the center post is going to be if you have a charge line. So that's going to be the taller one. You'll put that in place, and you'll have a T or a TM, that's tail marker. That's going to be your brown wire or your running light. Your G or GD on some of them is going to be the white ground. LT or L is going to be left turn, which is yellow, and RT or R is going to be your right turn signal, which is green. So with this all in place, I'm going to put this back in our plug and get it tightened down. Now, normally I'll put some RTV silicone to kind of seal everything up, just because it lives on the front of the vehicle. You want to make sure that the connections aren't going to break down long term, and I'm also going to put some wire loom on this to kind of clean it up. But before we do that, I'm going to test and make sure that it's working properly. I'm going to be using a test box with a umbilical on it. It's going to simulate hooking up to your RV. If you have your RV handy, now's a good time. Just plug in your umbilical, and then you're going to run through the light signals on the RV and check the towed vehicle to make sure that they're all working properly. So we'll run through these. First thing, we'll do our running lights. Then we'll do our left turn signal. Next, we'll do our right turn signal. And then finally our brakes. Is everything working properly? I'm just going to go ahead with some electrical tape, tape this all up, just kind of seal it. And then we'll get this mounted up to our bracket. And that's going to do it for the install. And this sure is quite a bit easier than a traditional diode kit, which isn't really hard to do, but this takes away all the guesswork of making sure you're splicing into the correct wires And honestly, it works out really well with those snap connectors. I didn't have any issues worrying that if those wires become strained, they're going to pull out of any connections made on spade connectors that you'd normally have on the diode. So if this is maybe something you're looking at because you're not a wiring expert, this is a great option. And that was a look and installation of the Curt custom fit wiring harness for a 2023 Jeep Wrangler.